And the goal of outreach like this is to instill hope and inspire action in our viewers.
We have a mobile broadcast studio, and we reach out to classrooms all over the world to talk about polar bears in the western Hudson Bay. We have a couple different kinds of connections that we do out here. Sometimes it's live back and forth, and other times the live connection goes out and questions are chatted back for us to answer.
Will polar bears go extinct?
What can my class do to help protect sea ice?
Just the other day, we had a Skype chat with an entire school in Kiev, and we got to show them their very first polar bear, and when that comes up on the screen, it's really cool.
It's neat to maybe inspire the next generation of scientists. Seeing their faces light up when we show them videos and photos and talk about our research gives us motivation to keep going and keep doing what we're doing.
Join us as we stream live. You can view the broadcast on our website or watch live chats on social media. Tune in, ask questions, join our efforts to protect polar bears and the sea ice they depend on.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're here back for our annual Fall Tundra Connections season in partnership with Explore.org and Frontiers North Adventures. I am Marisa Kraus, Director of Conservation Programs here at Polar Bears International, and I'm here with two of my friends that I'll let introduce themselves. And the topic of today's webcast is going to be talking about our long-term partnership with the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation, some of the collaborative work we do, and effective climate change communication strategies.
Great. Thanks, Marisa.
You're welcome.
I'm Kayla McCurry, and I am an outreach specialist for Polar Bears International and the training director for NNOCCI.
Hi everyone, I'm Jaren Orwig, and I'm actually based at Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden in Cincy, Ohio. I run our graduate program there, but I am also very much a part of NNOCCI on the training committee and a good partner of PBI.
Awesome. Thanks, you too. So first of all, you might be wondering to yourself, well, who is Polar Bears International and where are you? So Polar Bears International is the world's only nonprofit organization solely dedicated to the conservation of wild polar bears and their Arctic sea ice habitat. And today we are coming to you live from Tundra Buggy 1, which is our mobile broadcast unit that traverses the Canadian subarctic, and we can broadcast polar bears across the globe into classrooms, into homes, on your phones, live every fall from mid-October through mid-November. Today, we are on Tundra Buggy 1, so you can probably see us here. I guess you're seeing polar bears in the background. Tundra Buggy 1 is our mobile broadcast unit in which we house subject matter experts like scientists, expert educators, and those who use strategic framing in their everyday lives. And right now we're sitting in the Churchill Wildlife Management Area outside the town of Churchill, Manitoba, the self-proclaimed polar bear capital of the world. And each year we work with our Arctic Ambassador Center network, which is a network of 52 institutions, zoos and aquariums, across the US, Canada, and Europe, through what we call our Climate Alliance program. And recently, we've been partnering with the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation to bring sort of that strategic framing lens, because Arctic Ambassador Centers are committed to polar bear research, education, and effective climate communications. And so I'm hoping maybe I could pass it to one of you to give like a brief introduction of NNOCCI. I know most of the folks that are joining here are watching from afar or from the larger NNOCCI network, but there's also probably some tuning in who are unfamiliar with NNOCCI in general.
Well, hi NNOCCI Network. We're so thankful that you tuned in for NNOCCI Week, and hope this week has been great with all of the different sessions that have been set up for you, that you've enjoyed tuning in and have learned a lot and maybe been reinvigorated with your love of NNOCCI and all the tools and community that it provides. NNOCCI, if you're not familiar with its history, it really got started around 2010 with a National Science Foundation grant that helped us with social scientists, climate scientists, and zoo and aquarium educators figure out how do we best talk about climate change in a more productive manner, making it a conversation and maybe not a confrontation like we had been seeing so much in our everyday lives. And so through that, we created NNOCCI, the network that you're a part of now, and we've seen many different versions and iterations of what NNOCCI has looked like through study circles, beginner workshops, to now more recent days, the crash course and the trainer course, and all of the different resources that we provide online, NNOCCI.org, to still the same major goal of how do we create strategic framers, communicators that are making intentional choices about how we talk about an issue that as big as climate change can get or feel sometimes. And through our time as a network, we've really connected very much so with Polar Bears International. And one of the many reasons why we've partnered with Climate Alliance and NNOCCI Week and many other forums, hopefully in the future.
Right. And if I can add a little personal anecdotal story to that. So back in, I think maybe it was 2015 or 2014, Polar Bears International is a science-based organization, and so we believe that we should be using the best and most current available social science as well. And so in 2015, a colleague and I participated in the first iteration of the NNOCCI's study circles, right? And we're engaged in the work. We see so many connections and opportunities sort of weave our two networks because we have such similar conservation goals. And so I think that was the time when we first started thinking about how do we incorporate this work into our Arctic Ambassador Center network, and more importantly, how do we incorporate that into the Climate Alliance? So typically, we're up here with Climate Alliance right now. You can't see them, but they're over in the lounge car listening to Joanna Sully give a presentation about the Svalbard bears while we're over here connecting with all of you. But Climate Alliance they've been working so hard, right? They've been working for 8 months collaboratively online, building community, building their literacy in polar bear natural history, climate science, and effective climate communications. And so after participating in some of those asynchronous and synchronous learning modules online, we all get to come up and have this shared experience in Churchill, Manitoba, which we're so grateful for to be able to have that experience. And so, I guess what a typical day looks like is we're out here, we're learning from local guides, subject matter experts, indigenous knowledge holders, and really just sort of getting connected to the work and to the community. And then we're hearing presentations, we're bear viewing. I don't know if those of you are probably going to ask some of the things that we've seen. We did see a bear yesterday. We saw a bear today. Yep. What else did we see today?
We saw a whole mess of willow ptarmigans for all my birding friends out there. A huge flock of them. We've been very busy out on the tundra. We saw a small group of caribou, which made a lot of people's life list if you're keeping track of what mammals you haven't seen. So really engaging educators. We have these professionals who spend their whole working careers advocating for wildlife and wild places, and seeing the wildlife that we're talking about when we're talking about some of these outsized impacts on these northern climates when it comes to climate change. Being able to see that firsthand and then use these tools that we've been working on for the past many months, when they go back to their institutions, when they go back to their communities, and they go back to their families and friends, when they're having these conversations, feeling more empowered, hopefully, and feeling more ready to be active in these communications.
And I think what you said speaks well to a question that we always get, sort of, is why Churchill, right? Mm-hmm. Or why bring Zoo Aquarium staff up here? And I think that a lot of these team members, whether they're animal care, whether they're education, whether they're informal communicators or marketing staff, they might see polar bears every day at the zoo in their everyday lives, right? But the experience of coming up and looking a wild polar bear in the eyes for the first time is really an impactful one, and a great setting to set the stage for a powerful action plan of how are they going to go home and work with their Arctic Ambassador Center team to really place their institution in a leadership position of affecting change, but also communicating effectively to a broad-based audience, those folks that are visiting zoos and aquariums every day. And so I'm wondering, Jaren, if you might talk a little bit about this morning we did sort of a group activity, and some folks were talking about solutions. And so I'm hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit about the NNOCCI Solutions Suite.
Yeah, as many of you or members online know, something that I think makes NNOCCI unique is, obviously we want, if we're going to tackle an issue like climate change, we need solutions and need to think of ways to act and take steps. What makes NNOCCI unique is often out in the world you'll hear lots of great ideas, but they're often individual solutions, whereas NNOCCI is really honed in on we need solutions that match the scale and scope of the problem. And so we want people to think, we're so used to thinking individually and what can I personally do. And one of our goals as communicators is helping our audiences think about, well, who's my community and how can my community work towards a solution together? Thinking about energy efficiency or energy shifts of thinking, where do I get my energy in the first place, to even having conversations, whether it's at school, at the dinner table, at their workplaces, and really getting folks thinking, again, not just me, but all of us collectively, because those are the solutions, as we've seen, and as our scientist friends and social scientists tell us, that those are the kind of solutions and actions that we need to really make a difference on this thing called climate change.
When Elisa and I participated in that study circle, I think your solution suite is something that really that we really took home and thought would be really impactful, and thought, how can we incorporate that into our work? And Jaron asked me earlier, what did some of your solutions messaging look like prior, or what did some of your materials look like prior to working with Noki and incorporating that into your work? And what I'll say to that is that we really found a place and really found comfort in knowing that the language was tested and that it was positive and civic-oriented and solutions-focused. And so those of you who are following Polar Bears International on our social media, you might see that woven into our social media stories. You might see it in our printed annual news magazine, or you might see it come through in our blog posts or our e-news. Those of you who are tuning in for Tundra Connections and you're looking at the supporting curriculum, you might find that in our solutions handouts. And so we tailor that a bit differently if we're talking to adults or if we're talking to youth. And then, those of you, if you're visiting Churchill and you pop in Polar Bears International House, that has a public-facing space and interpretive center, you can see some of that strategic framing in our interpretives throughout the center. And so, we start the conversation with who we are and values, and we move to connecting a life tied to sea ice to the impacts of climate change, and round it out with some of these positive and civic-oriented solutions. And we're just, we're really grateful to be able to work with you guys and incorporate that into our work. So yeah.
What was the hardest part about that transition? Because I know, and I think all of us that have experienced Noki training, and even as our culture has changed and society and we're dealing with different things occasionally, what was the most challenging part when first introduced to Noki curriculum and strategic framing to work into PBI, which was already a very well-established organization with your own messaging techniques?
That's a great question. I think for me, probably the most challenging part of it was just like trusting the process and trusting the science, and instead of like the physical science, like also trusting the social science. But then also allowing myself to practice and allowing yourself to fail and trip up, right? Because I think somebody said during the first study circle that we participated in, it's like learning a new language. And we've been at this and we've had a relatively small team. I have to quit saying that because our team is growing so much exponentially over the past couple years. As you get larger, and some of you are working at large institutions with marketing departments, social media departments, education departments, animal care, and you're wondering, how do we, streamline this messaging? And I would say that it's just pushing that peanut up the hill, and not giving up and staying with it, and allowing yourself to practice, because that's, when you trip up. And I think that's when we learn, that's an opportunity to learn from our mistakes and keep at it. So I think that's probably was my biggest challenge. How do you feel about it, Kayla?
Yeah, I think we hear that a lot, right? Because especially as all of us in the environmental education space, we get really used to the way we learn to do things, and it feels safe and it feels comforting, and we're like, well, it's what we know, but we have this tool belt of skills that we use and materials we use, and what these strategic framing tools is just broaden that tool belt, right? And it's the more we practice something, the more comfortable it becomes, and I think that confidence grows as we start to use it more, and we start to make it our own, and we start to attach it and use it with our audiences, the audiences that the best. You know what's going to connect with your audience. You know what solutions are going to work best for them. You know what actions will feel motivating. Finding ways to connect these values and these shared experiences to help people understand this mechanisms of climate change and then really motivate them to take action.
And that's what's compelling about that is we take an organization like Polar Bears International, who already has this amazing reputation, and then you take any of the NNOCCI network members and all of the institutions that they are a part of that now are not just zoos and aquariums, but also span nature centers and civic and community organizations and many other businesses out there. You take all of that and you are all sharing a shared language of how we talk about this, then no matter where our friends and visitors go, the more and more that we use this unified, hopeful language that's also teaching good science and also pointing folks in productive solutions that will actually tackle the problem, we're actually going to get somewhere, which is what excites me. That's what makes me most hopeful and why I've been a part of NNOCCI for 10 years now. It's because it's not just all of the resources that NNOCCI has provided, which I hope everyone still uses and enjoys, but it is what it has given me in terms of hope and community and a sense that, hey, if all of us are doing this, we can actually make a true difference.
Yeah, and you touched on community. I think that's important in so many levels, right? Not just community level solutions, right? Or tapping into who your community is. Maybe that's your school, your church group, your the places that we all live, work, and play, right? Like scaling these up. I think that if I can turn it around, you were kind of saying what was the biggest challenge you had. I might pose this question to both of you, and I'll share as well. What within the NNOCCI network do you find to be the most helpful, or like something that you're reaching for the most often, or you're relying on?
That's a great question. I do find myself, there's kind of two things that spring to mind for me. The network itself, the people that we work with, not only within our board, our governing council, our network members in the field who are strategic framing every day, and we have an opportunity to connect with each other and find people locally, connect with people across the country who are finding really innovative ways to deploy these tools and brainstorming. Like, I'm kind of stuck on this and I really want to message this thing a certain way. We can reach out and support each other and have that virtual community, right? This group of like-minded folks who are doing the same work. In terms of like the toolkit and what I go to, I really find myself using these values to connect with people, to connect with our audience, to connect with these topics that can feel a little abstract or feel a little daunting, and it's a great way for me to just jump in and feel like it is a common language, a common starting point.
I think that besides the solutions, when we first participated in the study circle, one of the things that I was drawn to the most was that we could use an explanatory metaphor to diffuse the complicated science of climate change and use these things that are more familiar to the general public, and that it was meant to be used in, under 30 seconds or less or something? Am I quoting that correctly?
30 to 60 seconds.
Okay.
You're fast.
Because people ask us all the time, how do I explain climate change? And I think sometimes maybe we say that people are self-silencing because they don't feel like they have the appropriate tools or confidence to talk about it. I use the heat trapping blanket everywhere. And some of you who are watching, you've probably heard the heat trapping blanket on the news or, in different social networks and channels, which I think is just incredible. And I think it speaks to the impact of NNOCCI's work and all that the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change have done. And so, which I have another question then I'd like to ask you then is what's next? What are some of the newest projects that are coming up for NNOCCI? And I know that we're especially proud and grateful to get to work with NNOCCI on a new grant opportunity that I'm hoping maybe Kayla or Jaron, you can elaborate a little bit on that for the community that maybe perhaps doesn't know about it.
Yeah, so I think that if you've been chiming into some of the NNOCCI Week presentations so far, you may have heard us talk a little bit about this NNOCCI Goes to Canada, where we have a new grant that we are so grateful to be partnering with Polar Bears International on, that was funded by the U.S. Embassy of Canada's Climate Ambitions Program. It's a U.S. Embassy to Canada grant. In this opportunity, we've been granted $125,000 in collaboration with PBI to build a community of practice to change the conversation on climate. So it's going to be a 2-year grant where we're going to have the opportunity to do some virtual crash courses with different audiences, tapping into PBI's vast network of both AACs, Arctic Ambassador Centers, as well as teacher networks to help people feel more confident and build those skills to start having climate conversations in their classrooms, with visitors at their zoos and aquariums, and in their everyday lives.
I'm looking forward to that, because we've incorporated strategic framing into our work for Climate Alliance. And that's typically Climate Alliance is primarily North American institutions, zoos. This year we've got mostly zoos and aquariums from the U.S. We do have a Canadian institution represented this year, the Toronto Zoo. And we've also got somebody coming from Belgium. So I think it's a great opportunity to share this work, across the border, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, it's like NNOCCI 3.0 maybe.
Yeah.
Now we've done so much of our work in the United States to be able to have the support to move that into Canada, and really extend there, I think is really exciting. And you all know, and I know throughout this week, our NNOCCI membership committee has also been sharing other opportunities to get involved. And if you're wanting to know, or you want to be able to have a resource to point others to, it's just going to our website, NNOCCI.org, and that's where we keep up all of our other training and workshop opportunities that are coming ahead, so you can stay up to date that way.
And there are numerous ways to stay up to date on and current on what's going up with Polar Bears International as well. First, you can sign up for our e-news, to receive our e-news. Tundra Connections, annual Fall Tundra Connections season is here. And as a network, NNOCCI folks who are, primarily informal educators, communicators, we hope that you'll share that opportunity not only with your institutions and push that out, but also with your own networks of informal educators and communicators. You can visit our website at polarbearsinternational.org, in which we host a variety of online and free curriculum tailored to international or different standards for different nations. And one of which, actually, we have a new unit that was created last year by Alaska Pacific University graduate student, Emily Miller, that incorporates strategic framing and also some of the social emotional work in terms of talking about climate change and climate impacts on polar bears with grades 3 through 5. Yeah, so we're super excited about that project. Look, strategic framing is just trickling into all areas of our work.
Yeah,
part of the master plan.
Yeah, and there's so many great resources on the website that have strategic framing in them. These solutions handouts, these the curriculum, as you mentioned, and just tips. There's resources and tips, and a lot of them are framed towards polar bears, and a lot of them are framed towards our everyday life. So if you're looking for a place that might support the work you're already doing, it can be a nice. I would recommend checking out the website and seeing what you can find there.
Absolutely. And who is our NNOCCI facilitator on the other end there?
Oh, we're so grateful to have Carrie on the other end. She's looking at the chat right now. She's on the chat roll. And so if you have any questions for Polar Bears International, for NNOCCI, for what we're doing up here in Churchill with Climate Alliance, feel free to drop them in, and she is happy to pass those along to us as well.
Awesome, yeah.
So thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. So then I guess maybe we've got a couple minutes here where we're wrapping up, so I'd like to ask a couple more sort of final questions, but in particular about what we've been doing here this week. And so I'd like to ask maybe what was your most impactful moment of the day or the week thus far?
I always love seeing other people's first times seeing their favorite animal. It just year after year that I've been able and fortunate enough to be a part of Climate Alliance. Of course, I'm having my own moment when I'm seeing my first animals, like the caribou today. First time I've ever seen that in the wild, which was so exciting. But then watching others, especially zoo and aquarium professionals that have been teaching about polar bears for years, or zoo animal care staff that have been taking care of bears and other wildlife, to watch other people have those moments is just as exciting for me, as weird as that may sound. So even between yesterday and today, and watching people have those firsts, I would say take the cake for me.
It's been a great opportunity to see that community building and celebrating each other's wins become so much easier, right? When you're really just getting a chance to see that glow on people's faces and you're getting to know them and you're having this shared experience. I think for me, we've had a couple of really charismatic red foxes following us around who have been...
Like, they might be here now.
They might
we don't
be
know.
running around behind us as we speak. But they've been a real hoot today. Curious about the buggies, curious about us here at the lodge. And so, yeah, it's been gorgeous. So cute. Yeah,
thank
so
you
cute.
for sharing.
Yeah.
I'll share one, I guess, my own personal impactful moment or final moment here in the absence of any other questions. I think that for me, one of the things that I look forward to every year is that sort of network weaving and just seeing like where our alumni and our network are going to go. And when I think about it, you know, the polar bear community is so small, the climate communications community is so small, and we're so stronger when we work together. And I just had a moment today where I was thinking about how hard our whole cohort has worked the past 8 months. And I was just sort of thinking, like, I'm envisioning some of the folks here, some of the champions, the emerging leaders. I'm envisioning some of them returning as Polar Bears International field ambassadors or NNOCCI facilitators for trainings at their institutions. And just, you know, sort of getting messages about some of our former Climate Alliance graduates who are returning this year from the Columbus Zoo, from Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, from Cochrane Polar Bear Habitat, who have participated in Climate Alliance, build their literacy in climate communications, and now are returning to Churchill to act as ambassadors in our public-facing interpretive space and interact with those guests that are coming from all around the world to see polar bears.
Building capacity, building conservation leadership.
I know.
That's how it's going to get done.
It gave me all the feels. Yeah.
It's growing.
Yeah. Well, thank you, too, for joining me today aboard Tundra Buggy 1. For the first Tundra Connections of our annual fall season, we'll be running through mid-November. Don't forget to check out our website for the schedule. Polar Bear Week is coming up as well, first full week in November annually. And thank you to the NNOCCI community for joining us. Thank you for tuning in. We're looking forward to all that we do together, future Climate Alliance programs, the future of this grant program that we're going to work on together. Super jazzed about it. And thank you to our partners and sponsors, Explore.org and Frontiers North Adventures, for helping us run this annual Fall Tundra Connection season. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank
Hi,
you.
everyone.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. A polar bear's life cycle is almost exclusively tied to the sea ice. Because polar bears rely on sea ice to hunt, to breed, and sometimes to den, sea ice loss from climate change is their biggest threat, and the reason the bears are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN's Red List of Threatened Species. What we learn about climate change impacts on polar bears in Hudson Bay can be applied across the Arctic to help conserve other populations. Climate change is already affecting some populations of polar bears. Since we get most of our energy from fossil fuels, we are producing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. You see, regular amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere act like a blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and keeping our planet at a stable temperature. However, when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas for energy, we pump rampant amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This buildup thickens the blanket, trapping too much heat, disrupting the climate, and melting Arctic sea ice. When Arctic waters are cold enough, the top layer freezes into a special type of ice called sea ice. Sea ice is to the ocean what soil is to a forest.
it supports the entire Arctic food chain. Food from this marine ecosystem also sustains northern communities. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should, and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic, is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from. Because together, we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.